Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. And I want to go ahead and talk about a man who has been at the forefront of all things college football here over the last couple weeks. That is Kalen Deboer, the new head coach at Alabama. It's wild because I'm recording here on January 24th, 2024, and it was exactly 2 weeks ago to the day, just 2 weeks ago, that Nick Saban retired as head coach at Alabama. I bring it up because obviously Deboer's name comes to the forefront. About 48 hours after Nick Saban retires, Deboer is named Alabama's next head coach, and it has been a whirlwind from there. But as I just said, he's kind of been at the forefront, right? Everybody wants to know, how is he going to adjust to the SEC? How is he going to adjust to the South? Can he coach against all these great coaches in the SEC? How is he going to recruit? Now, I am a person that believes that he's going to be excellent. Not saying he's going to win a national championship next year. Not saying he's winning 6 in however many years like Saban. But I believe from what I've seen, Kalen Deboer is an elite program builder, a guy that I think really does a great job taking advantage of the talent that is at his disposal. A guy, I was telling my buddy Ryan Fowler this from Tide 100.9. I said, I don't think on a game in, game out basis, I saw any team more prepared every single week quite as well as Washington was. So anyway, I bring it up to say, your boy Torres is a big Deboer guy. Love Deboer. Big Kalen Deboer guy. But it's one thing for me, I'm some dude with a little microphone right there to talk about it. It's another thing to hear all of this from Kalen Deboer himself. And I thought it was interesting. On Wednesday, he went on the Pat McAfee show. First of all, shout out to Pat McAfee. I think it's pretty cool that he has built himself into a guy that when somebody wants to get a message out or when somebody feels like they need a big platform, they can go to the Pat McAfee show. Nick Saban was on it. Obviously, we know about Aaron Rodgers. I saw Matt Rule a few weeks ago. So credit Pat McAfee. He got really one of the first real long-form interviews with Kalen Deboer. And I thought Kalen Deboer said a lot of very interesting things on Wednesday, most notably how his team is going to look, how they are going to play. And bluntly, I thought he answered, he being Kalen Deboer, a lot of questions that a lot of Alabama fans had. And I think they got to be excited about what they are going to see from Kalen Deboer going forward. I want to talk about some of the stuff that Kalen Deboer said, because like I said, I just think there's a lot of reason for excitement if you're a Bama fan. So let's dive into some of what he said. First off, what I would say about Deboer is that, I think, and I'm not even saying it's Alabama fans. I think there's a general perception that, he played on the West Coast or he coached on the West Coast and he had Michael Penix and all they did was just throw the football all around the field. And I really didn't ever buy that. I think a great coach kind of plays to his strengths, plays to his weaknesses. I thought in the big games, he kind of knew that he probably, even though he had the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, probably didn't have the talent that Texas did, certainly that Michigan did, even that Oregon did. And so I've never believed this notion that he does it, that he wants to just play finesse, West Coast football. It was kind of what he had to do. And so he was kind of asked about that. Here's what he told Pat McAfee about that exact thing. He told Pat McAfee, quote, I certainly think we can run the ball. The heart and soul of it is still, you have to be physical. Your offensive line has to be great. Our running back at Washington, Dylan Johnson, was right at the top of the conference running the football. When it came down to it, that's who we are, what we believed in. With the personnel we have here, there's some amazing running backs in this program. I've seen firsthand who these guys are. The offensive line is always a huge piece of success and where it all starts. What we've done, we always tweak it here and there to fit your personnel. Ryan Grubb and the offensive staff will do exactly that. So first of all, if you're a Bama fan that was worried about, oh my goodness, we're going to be, whatever. We're going to be just some soft West Coast whatever. You don't got to worry about it. He just said it. And really, again, if you watched Washington this year, that very much backs up who they were. Now, again, there were certain games where they were at a talent disadvantage and they couldn't just line up and run the ball 60 times a game. Like, it just wasn't possible. But go back to some of the games where they did have a talent advantage. Go back to, say, the USC game where Dillon Johnson rushed for 256 yards in that game. Now, maybe that's an extreme example. Maybe USC is an embarrassment along the offense or along the defensive line, or at least they were this year. By the way, that was the game that got Alex Grinch fired, by the way, was when Washington rushed for about 10 yards per carry against him. Dillon Johnson averaged 9.8 yards per carry. But you look at the other games, 104 yards rushing for Dillon Johnson against Utah, 100 yards rushing in the first Oregon game, 89 yards rushing against a good Oregon State defense late in the season in the rain, averaged about 5.5 yards per carry. So don't buy the notion. Don't buy the nonsense. This guy wants to run the ball. And I think, as he said, he's going to have access to some pretty good players at Alabama in that running back room. You go back to last year, I know a couple guys have graduated, a couple guys have left. But I don't know that, some of the guys that he has access to, that he's ever really had access to, a player the caliber of Justice Haynes, a true freshman a year ago who got limited touches but still had about 200 yards rushing and 2 scores, 7 yards per carry on average. By the way, he averaged 7 yards per carry against Michigan in the Rose Bowl as well. A couple other guys in that offensive meeting room. I think the offensive line he inherits, even without Caden Proctor, who we never really talked about, but that interview he did at the Iowa wrestling meet or whatever certainly was interesting. Anyway, even without Caden Proctor, I still think this might be the best offensive line talent he's had, especially now that he's bringing in his center from Washington. So he wants to run the ball. Now, the question then becomes, are they going to be able to pass the ball? Because this is another thing that I have heard quite a bit. Well, he had Michael Penix, but Jalen Milroe is not Michael Penix. There are different kinds of quarterbacks. But here's the thing about Kalen Deboer and Michael Penix that I think has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle. Again, I think everybody thinks that when Michael Penix got to Kalen Deboer, he was a finished product. It was actually the exact opposite. Like Michael Penix was very good early in his career when Kalen Deboer was his offensive coordinator in Indiana. Then Kalen Deboer leaves. He kind of struggles, to be perfectly honest. And then he goes back to Kalen Deboer in Washington. Obviously, Ryan Grubb is there at that point, and they make beautiful music together as well. And again, this is a thing that I think is a little bit misinterpreted, okay? Just go back and look at Michael Penix's stats pre and post Kalen Deboer. Final 2 seasons in Indiana without Deboer. 56% completion percentage and then 53% completion percentage, 24 touchdowns combined. Now, admittedly, there were some injuries, there was some this, there was some that. He got, I think he probably came back a little ahead of schedule from a knee injury in 2021. Maybe he should have stayed, whatever. I bring it up to say, in the 2 years at Washington, here is what he did with Deboer. He went from 56 and 53% completion to 64 and 65% completion, from 24 touchdowns in the previous 2 seasons to 67 touchdowns the following 2 seasons. And so I'm not saying that's what Jalen Milroe is going to be, but Jalen Milroe, where Kalen Deboer and Ryan Grubb are starting from, is in a much better position than where Kalen Deboer and Ryan Grubb were starting with Michael Penix. And so I just think there's a lot of misperceptions about Deboer, who he is, what he did at Washington. Finally, and I know I already talked about this, but he had a third quote that I thought was very interesting, Deboer, with the Pat McAfee interview. He said, "You have to be convicted in who you are. I've had success at a lot of places that I think can carry over, and a lot of times it's building around people and in relationships. The X's and O's, football is football, but I'm getting to know this part of the country. I'm not completely familiar with it, but I've got people around me who certainly are." Now, look, that last part was obviously about recruiting. Obviously, that is the big knock on Kalen Deboer. Is he going to be able to recruit in the SEC, going up against Kirby Smart and Hugh Freeze and Brian Kelly and Steve Sarkisian and on and on and on? But I just bring it up because I think that first part is the most important part. He's a relationships guy, but more importantly, and this is the part that I love about him, and again, something I've talked about on Tuscaloosa Radio quite a bit, is the idea that basically he is a guy that builds an offense and builds a game plan and builds a whatever around that particular team's strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes when you get these offensive guys, right? I'm not going to name names, but you probably know who they are. This is how we do it. This is what we're going to do. And then you realize you don't have the personnel to do it. By the way, this is why I thought this was Nick Saban's best coaching job of his career, or at least at Alabama this past season in 2023. It's because they went into the season thinking they wanted to play one way. They figured out pretty quickly they could not play that way, and they had to refigure it out on the fly while, by the way, in SEC play, playing Ole Miss, playing Tennessee, playing all these teams. And so with DeBoer, the one thing I give him credit for, he's not too proud to just do what works and what won't, right? And stay away from what won't. I go back to that win over Texas in the Sugar Bowl. You go back to that game. It was pretty obvious early they could not run the football. Not because he didn't want to, not because he's a soft West Coast guy, but just because Texas's front was too good. And so why I bring it up, did you see what they did? A lot of short passes, a lot of dump off passes. They basically use the short passing game as the run game. That is an example of Kalen Deboer building a game plan and an offense around his team's strengths and weaknesses. Now, obviously, he's got Ryan Grubb by his side. He's got a lot of solid assistant coaches. But I'm here to say, man, I think this is going to work. Now, listen, we've talked about it a lot. I'm not here to say they're going 12-0 next year. Not here to say they're playing for a national championship next year. And I get that the schedule is tough. Forget all the details right now, but I know obviously at Tennessee next year, at LSU next year, at Oklahoma next year, the game before the Iron Bowl. I could be mistaken, but Missouri, either at home or on the road, I can't remember. They play Wisconsin in the out-of-conference slate. So schedule is unforgiving. By the way, some school named Georgia early in the season as well. But I just bring all of this up to very simply say that when I look at Kalen DeBoer, I believe in him, man. I really do. And I think the other thing too, and it's that last part. What did he say? I don't know this area great, but I brought in people that do, and I'm going to figure it out. And I think that's the kind of guy he is. I think he's the kind of guy that doesn't have too much pride, doesn't have too much of an ego, is willing to listen to the players, is willing to do what it takes to be successful at Alabama. And I truly believe that ultimately he will be. Thought it was very interesting to be able to hear from him firsthand on Pat McAfee's show on Wednesday. If you enjoyed this video, do me a quick favor. Make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New clips, new videos every single day. Make sure to subscribe. Talk soon.